I'd like to start this event by introducing myself. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And I especially want to thank our guest, Sofia Margaryan, who took time from her extremely busy schedule to join us today and to help shed some light on what the Armenian mission to the United Nations is doing, the United Nations in general, and issues related to the Artsakh situation as they relate to the United Nations. So thank you very much, Sofia, for being with us. My name is Osvanna Takvoryan, for those of you who do not know me. I'm a member of the Board of Governors of the Armenian Bar Association. I'm also the co-chair with Yelena, my co-chair here, of the UN, recently formed UN task force for the Armenian Bar Association. And we'll go a little bit of, we'll give you a little bit of more detail about what that task force is, why it was formed, and what we've been up to. But before I do that, I'd like Yelena to say a few words and introduce herself, and then Sofia can introduce herself next.
Hi everyone, my name is Yelena Ambartsumian. I was AGBU's representative to the United Nations during college and law school about a decade ago. My background is in cross-border commercial litigation, as well as in internal and regulatory investigations. And as Osvanna mentioned, I co-chair the UN task force. And I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to work with Osvanna and with other professionals at the Armenian Bar Association, particularly on a cause that is so close to all of our hearts and minds. I'm excited and grateful to Sofia Margaryan, who is the legal advisor at the Armenian mission to the United Nations, for her participation in this evening's program. As many of you are well aware, there are numerous misconceptions about the United Nations, what it can and what it cannot do, from peacekeeping missions to UN Security Council resolutions, even to protecting cultural heritage. And so the goal of this evening's program is to give an overview on the work of the Armenian mission, the very important work it's been doing, and also the relevant UN mechanisms, particularly as they pertain to Azerbaijan's recent military aggression on the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. So with that, I will yield the floor to Ms. Margaryan, who will introduce herself and discuss the work of the mission.
Thank you, Yelena. Thank you, Osvanna, for this brief introduction. It is, and a very good evening to everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be part of this conversation that the Armenian Bar Association has put together. I have to admit, this is the first session I'm addressing this year, and I'm really glad to have such a good beginning. We at the mission are very appreciative of the ongoing partnership we have with the association, and we of course look forward to cooperating with our friends at AB in future. As you mentioned, I am the legal advisor at the permanent mission of Armenia. In fact, I've spent quite some time with the mission. I joined it in 2014. Back then I was holding a sustainable development portfolio, and then I went to the capital, and last year I came here in my capacity as a legal advisor, taking care of the sixth committee, of which I will elaborate further. It's one of the main committees of the General Assembly, and some other areas that relate to international law. So with this, if there are questions, I'll be happy to begin with those and to present perhaps what we do at the UN and what the UN is, as you said, what the UN is about and what it's not.
So Sofia, if I may ask a very basic question, only because I've spoken to a few people, lawyers and non-lawyers, and some people don't even know what the mission is. Would you mind just starting off by explaining what the mission is and how it's part of the Armenian MFA?
Yeah, it's in fact the mission is a diplomatic term that has been used historically, and it came to be codified, I believe, in the 20th century through the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and it is largely used to refer to a diplomatic representation mandated by a sending state with the duty of acting in that capacity. This can happen either at the bilateral level through embassies or consulates, or at the multilateral level. And in this regard, of course, we mean international or intergovernmental organizations such as the United Nations, for example. So the term permanent mission is used to refer to a diplomatic representation to an international or intergovernmental organization of which the sending state is a member. The permanent mission of Armenia to the United Nations in New York is therefore responsible for representing the Republic of Armenia at the United Nations, of which it became member in 1992.
So there are other permanent representatives, and I guess UNESCO, for example?
Yes, so the head of a diplomatic mission is usually a senior diplomat who holds the rank of an ambassador. Now, what makes a permanent representative different from a regular ambassador is that a permanent representative is an ambassador to an international organization such as the UN or UNESCO, of which the country is a member. Sometimes a country can start with being a member to a particular organization and then withdraw. For instance, I believe in the case of the UK, their permanent representative to the European Union is currently, after the Brexit, he became an ambassador to European Union. So yeah. So a permanent representative is a term that refers to an ambassador of a sending state to an international organization of which the sending state is a member.
So for the Armenian mission to the UN, you mentioned the Sixth Committee. Could you please describe the work that you're responsible for, both the mission and then you personally?
The General Assembly, one of the main committees of which is the Sixth Committee, is the General Assembly is the most representative body of the United Nations. It is comprised of 193 member states. The General Assembly exercises deliberative, supervisory, financial, and elective functions, including the elections of the UN Security Council non-permanent members and judges to the International Court of Justice. Decisions at the GA are usually reached by a simple majority vote on important questions. However, a two-thirds majority may be required. The General Assembly convenes annually and in special sessions, electing a president each year from among 5 regional groups of states. And a substantive portion of the work of the General Assembly is delegated to its 6 main committees. First committee deals with disarmament and international security. Second committee deals with economic and financial matters. The third committee is the Human Rights, Social, Humanitarian, Cultural Committee. Fourth committee deals with decolonization and special political matters. Fifth committee is the one who is in charge of administrative and budgetary issues. And the sixth committee deals with the legal affairs, which, the various aspects of international law. As I mentioned, I covered the sixth committee, which looks into various aspects of cooperation in international law and international humanitarian law. It's a wide range, which encompasses a wide range of topics that the member states deliberate and adopt resolutions each year. What makes this committee special from others is that all resolutions are adopted by consensus. It is a consensus committee.
Yeah, Manat, thank you for that introduction to the mission and the committees. Can you give us a little bit more of a broader perspective of the different UN bodies and where they're based and what each of their roles are? Just a very basic introduction.
Of course. Well, I just introduced gave a very brief overview of what the General Assembly is, and another principal organ, a very important one, includes the UN Security Council, which is the principal organ in charge of maintenance of international peace and security. The UN Security Council does not have a universal membership. It is only comprised of 15 member states, with 5 of them holding permanent membership, P5 member states, as we refer to them, and the remaining 10 are non-permanent members who are elected for a term of 2 years. And those elections are usually very, very competitive. as you might assume. Another deliberative body which is based in New York, is the Economic and Social Council, which consists of 54 member states who are elected for a term of 3 years by the General Assembly. All elections are taking place in the General Assembly. ECOSOC is empowered to recommend international action on matters of economic and social cooperation, health, education, cultural related areas. And most of ECOSOC's work is performed through functional commissions on sectoral topics such as population, social development, statistics, science and technology, also the status of women. It is remarkable that this year Armenia holds membership both in Economic and Social Council, also in one of its functional commission, which is the Commission on the Status of Women, where the permanent representative of Armenia is also the chair, holding the chairmanship of the commission. And also Armenia is a member of, currently is a member of the Human Rights Council, which is based in Geneva. Human Rights Council is the UN's intergovernmental body, which is responsible for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights and addressing situations of human rights violations. It is comprised of 47 members who are elected for a term of 3 years, and Armenia is a member for the term of 2020-2022. So these are the main deliberative bodies. In addition to that, the UN family also comprises a number of specialized agencies, such as, for example, UNESCO, also funds, programs, and agencies such as UNICEF, UNDP, World Food Program, etc., many of which are part of the United Nations Development Group, which is a coalition of UN agencies and organizations aimed at fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN family is actually very, very large, and there are very many types of organizations that are affiliated with the UN. The mission of Armenia to UN in New York is the primary responsibility of the mission is, of course, engaging with the ones who are based in New York.
Thank you for that background. Can you tell us a little bit what advantages Armenia has being on these various committees and councils that you mentioned? What are the advantages to a member state of being on these councils, such as the UN Human Rights Council, for example?
I'm back.
Sorry, did you hear my question, Sofia?
No, could you please repeat that, Osvanna, because I think my connection was, was tricky.
I just wanted to know, actually, you know what? I just noticed that we have a lot more participants now than at the beginning. So I want to say welcome to those who have recently joined. And something I didn't mention at the beginning, which is that this is the second in a series of webinars that the Armenian Bar Association has been holding and will continue to hold related to, in connection with legal issues related to ATA. So this is currently open to the members of the Armenian Bar Association, but it's being recorded and it will be made available on the Armenian Bar Association's YouTube channel, as well as the Facebook page for anyone who wants to view it later or to share it with someone who might be interested in what was discussed today's topic. So welcome to those who recently joined, and thank you again, Sofia. So my question was, you mentioned that Armenia currently is a member of the Human Rights Council. And there's only, I think you said 47 member states.
That's right.
Currently. So I was just wondering, what are the advantages to a member state being on, for example, that particular part of that particular council?
Mm-hmm. So I have to say that a membership to Human Rights Council is quite competitive. It was there are usually more candidates than than slots allocated to regional groups, and our last elections to the Human Rights Council were indeed very competitive. But Armenia did really very well. We got elected with the largest number of votes in our regional group, which I believe is a great reflection of trust of the international community, but also of the human rights record of our country. That was a really good demonstration of all that. So in fact, it's a lot of work if you ask me what is the membership in a particular body about, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of engagement. It's a lot of sessions to attend and to engage. But regardless of our membership, which is rotatory membership, Armenia's agenda has been pretty much crystallized over years, and it's based around Armenia's agenda at the UN. It's based around the main pillars of the three main pillars of the UN's work, which is peace, development, and human rights. And those are the principles which have laid down the priorities and objectives that define Armenia's engagement with the world. So Armenia has a very well-established track record of supporting and promoting human rights, including most notably through the concept and the practice of prevention of genocides, prevention of atrocity crimes. To this end, since 1998, Armenia has been leading international efforts to underpin the importance of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, as well as to construct a foundation for prevention. In 2015, the UN General Assembly unanimously adopted Resolution 69/323 tabled by Armenia, which proclaimed the 9th of December as an International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and the Prevention of this crime. And that resolution followed up on a resolution which was unanimously adopted by the UN Human Rights Council, again upon Armenia's initiative. And that adds to the continued efforts of Armenia to promote consolidated international action against the crime of genocide. Earlier this year, last year, Armenia presented another resolution at the Human Rights Council, again, aimed at prevention of genocide.
So that kind of ties into one of the things I wanted to ask you about, which is through the ABA's UN task force, we've had the privilege of advising and collaborating with the mission. And so we have, I guess, more of a bird's eye view into the broad scope of work and how busy you've been since the 27th of September. Could you please explain to the audience what the mission has been doing since then, particularly with respect to, well, you know,
yes.
the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
Yes. Well, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has always been central to the mission's efforts and engagement at the UN. Prior to the outbreak in September, for many years, Armenia has been very consistent in advocating for collective rights, including the rights of people to self-determination, which is a fundamental principle of the Charter of the United Nations, also enshrined in the landmark UN documents that constitute the normative and institutional frameworks for the promotion of human rights, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And it's the progressive realization of the inalienable right of people to decide upon their own political destinies that is a basic principle of international law. And it's been a natural process, as demonstrated by the very history of the United Nations, which was initially founded by, I believe, 51 member states, and currently embraces a family of 193 nations working together on a wide variety of issues of a common global agenda. So the rights of people to self-determination has been indispensable to Armenia's agenda, also in terms of the wider development agenda, because we see it as indispensable to the realization of the right to development as a landlocked developing country whose access also is to the sea through a neighboring transit country continues to be essentially denied. Armenia has been constantly supporting all processes aimed at addressing the detrimental barriers to the realization of the right to development and international cooperation. But of course, we have been consistently working to counter, for many years, to counter the manipulative and repetitive narratives pushed forward by Turkey and Azerbaijan with the aim of distorting the root causes and consequences of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as well as the fundamental principles of its settlement. Whether through regular interventions from the floor at the formal sessions or through multiple letters addressed to the UN Secretary General and other UN officials, Armenia has been continuously highlighting the main root cause of the problem, the main root cause of the conflict, that is that a total elimination of the Armenians is at the core of the modern state building of Azerbaijan, as reflected in the rising levels of hate speech, Armenophobia, cultivation of the anti-Armenian ethnic hatred sponsored at the state level, which has been, and it's not what we are saying, this is something that has been repeatedly reported by multiple international bodies, such as the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, or the UN Committee Against Racial Discrimination, for instance. So after all, the conflict, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict started with the atrocities committed against the Armenians in Sumgait, when Azerbaijan responded to the peaceful appeal of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh to self-determination with mass violence. And the massacres of the Armenian population in Azerbaijan clearly demonstrated that the Azerbaijani authorities pursued the goal of total extermination of the Armenians, and that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh face an existential threat. So this is something that we have been presenting to the international community, to the UN for many years. Also making it clear that the truth is that over the years, the leadership of Azerbaijan has been consistently rejecting proposals for a diplomatic settlement. Instead, they've been resorting to an exponential arms race, to hate speech, while blaming the mediators, the international community, everyone, for their own inability to prioritize peace and security over violence and ethnic animosity. A very simple example probably is one of the most illustrative in this regard would be the to name Azerbaijan's failure to honor the multiple proposals by the OSCE Minsk group co-chairs, the mediators of the conflict, regarding the implementation of confidence building measures and consolidation of the ceasefire regime, such as the establishment of an investigative mechanism into ceasefire violations, expansion of the number of international monitors, refraining from provocative actions, including use of snipers and engineering works along the line of contact and the state border. And the authorities of Azerbaijan have been remarkably consistent in promoting the language of threat, fueling ethnic hatred, and basically rejecting all the proposals put forward by the mediators. In doing so, they also seek to push for sort of a narrative that is using the concept of self-defense in a very victim-blaming way as a purported justification for military action. So this is something we've been countering at the UN, and this is something that we have been working since the outbreak of the aggression in September. No?
Yes. Sofia, there's actually for those of you that are watching us and would like to ask questions, you can just post questions in the comment section to the panelists, and we'll be happy to get to them. And a question came up regarding, as a follow-up to Armenia being on the Human Rights Council. And there's a question, Sofia, I think you can see it there as well, but the question is, what did Armenia do in the Human Rights Council regarding the use of cluster bombs and other internationally banned weapons by Azerbaijan during October? I think this is a question probably a lot of our viewers are wondering about. If you can please address that.
So I just have to make a sort of a disclaimer that I am representing a permanent mission of Armenia to New York, not in Geneva. So I'm not really in a position to comment on the work that Armenia, the mission of Armenia is carrying out through other representations. I could provide an overall overview of the general Armenian foreign policy and the work of our foreign service, but this would be a very technical question that should be probably directed to our colleagues in Geneva.
Well, then going back to something that you mentioned before, and I want to make sure that it didn't get lost. You mentioned that beyond interventions on the floor, you've also been responding to narratives by the Azerbaijani government. And you said that you've been doing that through letters to the Secretary General. I'm going to ask the question as if I don't know the answer, but are those letters publicly available? Is there a place where people who are interested could go to read those letters?
Mm-hmm.
And are there some recent letters that you wouldn't mind briefly discussing? I saw that you, by you, I mean the mission recently submitted letters regarding the self-defense pretext and also the Baku military parade.
That's right. So yes, some of the letters are public. That really is that really depends whether the sending state wishes a letter to be public or not. In case we want the letter to be made available to public, we ask the Secretary General to publish it as a document, and we specify the agenda items to which, in our view, the letter belongs. There are letters that are not published, and we've been conducting a very extensive communication, especially in the early days of aggression, and then throughout in the course of the war. We have been sending letters to various officials across the UN system and to member states and to various groups of member states, such as, for example, the Francophone group or other groups to which Armenia belongs, to raise awareness about what's happening on the ground, to bring evidence, to bring facts, to update our fellow missions and member states about what's actually happening. So yes, the letters that you mentioned, they are public, and in fact they were sent out at the end of the year, last days of December. But I believe they were published earlier this week, and they can be accessible. They're accessible to public. The documents at the UN are the UN documents are. Can be accessed through the UN document search portal. And there is a way of retrieving all the communication from Armenia or other member states if the search settings are customized accordingly. So it's easy to pull out all the letters that Armenia has been sending to the Secretary General with a request of making them available to public.
And I understand that, as you said before, diplomacy works best when it does so quietly. But beyond these letters being in the UN database, does the mission also publish them anywhere else, for example, on its Facebook page?
That's part of our, yes, that's part of our outreach activities to make our work as transparent as possible. But like you said, sometimes the diplomacy works best when it's silent. We believe we can find it is possible to have the right balance and to keep the public updated about the activities of Armenia at the UN at the same time while doing the more of a silent track. So our activities are usually presented at the social media accounts of the mission. We have a Facebook page, which has been active since, I believe, 2015. And we have a Twitter account, which has been active for the past 2 or 3 years or so. So those two are accounts are reflective of the work that we do at the UN. And yes, when there is a development, when we make a statement, an intervention, or we send a letter to Secretary General, those things are usually reflected in the social media and also at the website of the mission, which we also maintain.
Actually, I'm glad that you mentioned the website, Sofia. I've worked at the United Nations very briefly, so I kind of knew where to go to look for these letters. And I know the volume of letters and reports that were circulated by Azerbaijan and some from Turkey that the mission has had to respond to. All of the misstatements, the false records that Azerbaijan was attempting to set in the UN. which you so right, with which the mission was, had to put back on track and really correct the record, if you will. And I know it's been a lot of work, but for those that are watching who don't have that, don't know exactly how to maneuver the UN document system, for example, I'm glad that I think on the Facebook page, I've seen you post some of the letters. And if you could do more of that, I think maybe even the two that Yelena mentioned, I think it would be helpful for just the general public to know, what the mission is dealing with and what they've had to respond to, and the quality of the response that's coming out of the Armenian mission to the UN. I know that you can't really put everything out there because I know there's been a lot of volume. So I was, blown away by the quantity of the correspondence and reports since September 27th. It was really a lot. But some of the, poignant ones, the more, it would be nice if you could share more of those letters, I think, just so the general public who's interested in finding out what's happening at the UN level can go to the website and have it more easily accessible.
Yes,
so thank you,
Osvanna, absolutely, and thank you for that feedback. And of course, that's our intention to make our work as accessible as possible. But we also have to, bear in mind the realities, which are, you mentioned the mission of Azerbaijan and Turkey, and they outnumber the Armenian mission many times. For us, it's really a bit challenging to keep up with all the developments that are happening in the UN. And the UN is a very dynamic place. It has a very large, wide agenda, and it has a life of its own. It is very exciting to be part of that life, but it is also very challenging for small missions who sometimes have to balance and run impossible schedules in one day to cover and attend a few meetings that run in parallel, a few processes that go in parallel, and many other things. All the intergovernmental processes of which Armenia is part of. So it's important to engage as much as possible.
So you're getting a lot of questions about the Security Council and what the Security Council has been doing since September 27th. If you can please touch a little bit on what's been going on at the UN at the Security Council level, that would be greatly appreciated.
Right. So, so the last time the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh was discussed at the UN Security Council, that was back in 1993 during the active phase of the war. And back then, the Security Council adopted 4 resolutions. I know there is a lot of speculation about what those resolutions are about, but clearly, I would definitely like to set the record straight in terms of explaining what those resolutions are not about. So first of all, the primary objective of those 4 UN Security Council resolutions adopted in 1993 was demanding an immediate cessation of hostilities and demanding a political solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict instead of a military one. And definitely, and I know that both Azerbaijan and Turkey have been manipulating those 4 resolutions and invoking them so many times, but in a very misplaced and misguided way, because clearly in no way can these 4 resolutions adopted 27 years ago be interpreted as a license to kill or to commit barbarity or to sponsor international terrorism in 2020 amidst an unprecedented global healthcare crisis. So clearly that's not what those 4 UN Security Council resolutions were about. Moreover, to have a better understanding of what those Security Council resolutions actually demanded, we have to remember that the Security Council recognized that the conflict was one between Armenia and the local Armenian forces from Nagorno-Karabakh, not the Republic of Armenia. This is very crucial in understanding those resolutions, which have been so extensively
between Azerbaijan, right?
Between Azerbaijan and the local Armenian forces, not the Republic of Armenia. So that because they placed the responsibility on the local Armenian forces. And they explicitly mentioned the local Armenian forces, and they do that in all the consecutive resolutions. So even though those resolutions are so often invoked by Azerbaijan and Turkey, who, by the way, are in direct breach of these very resolutions, because those resolutions demand, among other things, that states in the region must refrain from destabilizing actions, from hostilities, and from any interference or intervention that would lead to the widening of the conflict. And clearly that's something that that Turkey has failed to do. So coming back to the most recent developments, as you are probably aware, following the outbreak of hostilities, following the aggression that was unleashed by Azerbaijan on September 27, the UN Security Council convened a session to discuss the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. And the first such session happened, I believe, a few days into the hostilities. It was in the late September. And back then, the Security Council came up with something that is called Elements for the Press, which is a short message that all the 15 members find acceptable, and that is something that is intended for to be communicated to the press. And usually that is communicated by the member state which holds the presidency of the month, and that was Niger. So the president of the Security Council read out that the elements of the press, which the Security Council adopted. And those were basically in line with the statement issued by the UN Secretary General. And just a reminder that throughout the aggression, the UN Secretary General made 5 consecutive statements calling for immediate cessation of hostilities, and asking to refrain from destabilizing actions and to commit to a peaceful settlement within the framework of the OSCE Minsk co-chairmanship format. So that was the also the perception of the UN Security Council membership, and that there was also another session in October, which again discussed the situation, and during which the member states reiterated the position that there should be an exclusively peaceful way to settle the conflict. I'd like to, I don't know if there are more questions about the work of the role of the UN Security Council.
Yeah, so
there are questions in,
there was one question, and I think, and that question related to, I guess, the sense that during the 90s, the UN Security Council came up with 4 resolutions. They were actively seized of the matter. And in the recent hostilities, more or less the Security Council hasn't been taking as strong of a position. You mentioned the elements, the letters to the press. So was that perception because the OSCE Minsk group had been established as a result of those 1994 Security Council resolutions? And so the idea was, okay, now we have this framework to negotiate, so it should all be handled through that framework. And the Security Council really doesn't have a role to play. And beyond that, there was another question about, to what extent was there discussion about sending a peacekeeping force or for the UN Security Council to kind of be more involved or to have a stronger, be it a resolution or a stronger response to actually cease the hostilities versus these statements that call on, the false equivalency of both sides to stop the conflict.
Yes, Yelena, you were, I think you mentioned the role of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship, and that is something that is crucial in this context. And let us not forget that the co-chairs are represented by 3 of the 5 members that are permanent members of the UN Security Council with the veto power. So both Russian Federation, France, and United States, they are the ones who are adopting the UN Security Council resolution, and they're also the ones who are mandated with the peaceful settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So clearly, the objective of the UN Security Council, and that was the understanding of the membership, that their efforts should in no way be, that those efforts should be supplementary and not replacing the original mediation format. All the efforts should be guided by the principles of non-duplication of efforts and efficiency. And of course, the regional dimension is very important at the UN, and in fact, it's in the UN Charter that the settlement of disputes should be delegated to regional level whenever that is possible. So the UN has been very supportive always about the role of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, and the UN Secretary General has consistently expressed his support to the format. And that's something that, of course, Armenia appreciates, both Armenia and Artsakh appreciate, and that's something that we are currently working to maintain and sustain and cultivate, that to reinforce that support to the format. That's a very important priority that is at hand at our hands right now.
Thank you for that elaboration, Sofia. One of the questions we were asked is, what other member states are supportive of Armenia's position in the UN and the various issues that are important to Armenia? Can you elaborate on some of the alliances, whether it's regional or within the UN member states, and which are the states that are most supportive of various issues that are important for Armenia, such as cultural heritage, obviously, I think all member states, in terms of human rights, which I know it's the council is based in Geneva, and so that's not within something that you can elaborate on. But other than the human rights issues, what are some of the issues, more specific issues that certain member states support Armenia's position?
Right, Osvanna. So I have to begin probably by saying that it is not very common for multilateral diplomacy to expressions of bilateral support, especially those that go against a certain member state. Those are not very common in multilateralism, because multilateral diplomacy is more about cooperation. It's more about agreeing on certain things rather than disagreeing, because eventually, and the general understanding is that member states should try to leave their bilateral issues aside when multilateral cooperation is concerned, because those can be very divisive and they can jeopardize the outcomes of multilateral cooperation. And when it comes to United Nations, Armenia is a member state just as Turkey and Azerbaijan are member states of the UN. So that we are all UN. The UN, we all belong to the UN family. And it's not very common for a certain member state to openly express support on certain political matters bilaterally, on certain bilateral issues. So I would say that there are expressions, but they're not open, they're not explicit, but there are other ways of supporting. What member states usually tend to support is a cause, is a priority, is agenda. And here, of course, Armenia has positioned itself throughout various agendas where we have our own frameworks of cooperation, the prevention agenda being one of those. You mentioned cultural heritage. That's another important area where Armenia cooperates with interested member states. For instance, Armenia is part of a format that has recently been established, and it's on the Ancient Civilizations Forum. And these are areas where Armenia is very active, and our cooperation is very active. But like I said, explicit support from one member state to another at the multilateral platforms, in multilateral platforms, that's not very common.
Which is very unfortunate, especially in a case where one member state is in clear breach of the UN Charter, one would argue, not to mention Security Council resolutions, and when the other members are staying silent and not condemning those actions, for the sake of for diplomacy to move forward or whatever the excuse is for not condemning and not acting. It gives this, we talk about false equivalency, which it is not the case when one member state is clearly violating the principle as a whole, the Charter of the United Nations, and is not pursuing a peaceful avenue. And is blatantly violating the Security Council.
Yeah, yes, Osvanna, I see what you mean, but that's exactly how it is. And the fact is the international community has not been silent. And many states have actually spoken, and many officials have spoken. The UN Secretary General has issued 5 statements. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has been quite vocal. Everyone was was calling for immediate cessation of hostilities, was calling for a peaceful settlement. And then, this is diplomacy. Sometimes not everything is spelled out, but I'm absolutely convinced that both Azerbaijan and Turkey would have preferred everyone to be completely silent and not to say anything. But the very fact that member states and international organizations were actually expressing concern, that is something for Azerbaijan and Turkey to reflect on, because there is a lot behind those statements of concern. There is a lot of context behind.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I know a lot of the, our Armenian members who are watching this probably were wondering about that. And so, that's a very good point that you make, and thank you for pointing that out. That the fact that they've spoken at all about this issue and have urged that these activities cease is saying a lot. As you said, they could remain silent and completely ignore it. Let's see. We have a question about if there's anything that the general public can do to support the Armenian UN initiatives. Is there anything that could be done on that front? Any kind of a support for the UN mission, for the Armenian mission to the UN? I think I know that is a very interesting question. We're always happy and open to all questions and engagement with the public about when our compatriots have questions about the work of Armenia's mission at the UN. We're always happy to answer it. And I'd say follow our Facebook page, follow our Twitter account. It's not everything that is there, but not everything is there, but most of the work is reflected there. And of course, we are happy to take questions whenever we have a chance to, and to engage as much as possible with the public.
There was a related question, which was how have Armenian NGOs been supporting the work of the mission? So beyond the Armenian Bar Association, I know in October, a number of Armenian NGOs with consultative status at the UN, at ECOSOC, wrote a letter to the Secretary General. So I believe that was AGBU, ARS, the Armenian International Women's Association, and I think there may have been one other. But that letter discussed the current war crimes at that time, which I think was in mid-October. And then it also addressed these 1994 Security Council resolutions. And I think the reason for that was a lot of Armenian Americans, even as expressed in these Q&As, we're seeing so many references to these UN Security Council resolutions. Sofia, you've seen the same references we have, which is that Armenia is in violation of them. Anyway, so
yes, well, one-sided interpretations of the UN Security Council resolutions were probably the reason why the UN Security Council was so reluctant to adopt another one this time. Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly why it didn't happen, because obviously these resolutions have been misinterpreted and misperceived, and they have also been instrumentalized and weaponized and presented as a, like I said, as a license to kill, which is absolutely not what the intention of the UN Security Council was and what the mandate of the UN Security Council. So that was clearly the opposite of what the original demands mm-hmm. contained in those resolutions were. So, you know, this is, of course, a problem, and that's something for those two member states to reflect on. Armenia has always been very clear about its position on the UN Security Council resolution. We never really avoided talking about them, because I think we had a clear understanding of what those resolutions were about and what their expectations were. Like I said, never there was not one single requirement addressed to Armenia that Armenia did not implement.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing, because if you actually read the Security Council resolutions, and I encourage everyone to do so, just Google them, they're available online. You'll see, exactly what they say and how they've been so misrepresented. And there's been sort of this intellectual, I guess, laziness on the part of certain stakeholders, and I'll call out the media for sure. I watched an interview on CNN with Christian Amanpour and the then Armenian foreign minister, and she was referring to the Security Council resolutions that Armenia had violated them. And she said they're black and white. I've read them. And mm-hmm. I thought, oh my gosh, anyone who's actually read them would know that isn't exactly. An accurate statement. So while the mission is responding to all of these things, at the same time, I really encourage Armenian professionals and non-Armenians to actually go and look at the Security Council resolutions themselves, and look at the 2008 General Assembly resolution that proclaims Nagorno-Karabakh as part of the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, and see how many states actually voted for that, see which states voted against it. Things aren't as black and white as they've been weaponized to be.
Yes, I agree with you, Yelena. Sometimes it's just domestic propaganda that is being imported to UN, and it happens more often than we think. Because sometimes we're only focused on the Armenian agenda, while we here at the UN mm-hmm. we see that quite often, and we know that sometimes many platforms get misused for domestic political reasons. But coming back to the question of NGOs, and we're very appreciative of the role that the civil society is playing, and Armenia has a vibrant civil society, and which is an important partner in our policy making. We do appreciate the effort, the initiatives that the NGOs, that the civil society organizations have been putting together, and we think this is a very strong signal and a strong message to the UN. Because United Nations it is primarily an intergovernmental organization, but the civil society voices are very important for the UN, and that track is getting more, increasing prominence at the UN. And I think that it's really important to keep that voice and to amplify those voices, and to basically convey the message that, we're civil society and we're watching you. This is very important. We're watching the governments, we're watching the international public servants, we're watching the international organizations, the way they respond. And we take, note of that, and we keep our records. So that's just an extra, a guardian that everybody needs. It's a system of checks and balances that we all, that our systems need. So probably I would say that the mission is quite supportive of that effort and of the role that the civil society is playing.
Sofia, if you can share with us, now that there's another ceasefire in effect, what are some of the initiatives related to Artsakh that the Armenian mission is focusing on at the UN or trying to, what are some of the issues related to Artsakh that are circulated or are they being discussed at the UN level?
Mm-hmm. Well, Osvanna, for us, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh is not a conflict. It is about people. So we see that through the prism of human rights, through of course, primarily in the context of the people's right to self-determination, but also most broadly in the context of human rights, both individual and collective. And for us, it is an issue of an existential matter, a matter of the people to have an opportunity to choose their own political destinies without fears or coercion, and to live their lives in dignity and to have the kind of future that they want. And this is, of course, the main priority for Armenia that we work for. And it's been defining our agenda for the past years, and they will continue to do so in the future. But that is also very interlinked with the prevention, the general prevention agenda that I mentioned earlier, which is aimed at prevention of atrocities in the future, because as a nation that has gone through the horrors of a genocide, the Armenian people know and bear the duty, the moral imperative to support the international efforts to prevent such crimes from recurring in the future. And we just spoke about the Armenia's work at the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly insofar as the genocide prevention is concerned, and the day that was instituted due to Armenia's efforts, the 9th of December, which back in 2015 was proclaimed as an international day upon Armenia's initiative. And since then, events in observance were held regularly at the UN. And last month, the mission of Armenia put together a virtual high-level panel that discussed the role of mass media in genocide prevention. That was a very, we believe, timely and important conversation that brought together prominent practitioners, scholars, also high-level officials from the UN, the Undersecretary General for Global Communication, as well as the Special Advisor for Genocide Prevention, the Secretary General Special Advisor for Genocide Prevention, and Armenia's Foreign Minister made remarks. We think that was very relevant to, in terms of timing, also in light of what was happening in the months of September, October, and November, and the way that the mass media were reacting to the ongoing atrocities. And we've all seen examples of certain of different levels of professionalism of different journalists. Some of them were really doing their living up to the standards of the right standards of journalism, while others were for some reason were more on the side of promoting inaction and passivity, and even the aggressors' side. So I think that this is there was a very important conversation which will probably have a follow-up in the future at the UN, because we all know how important mass media is, and through various forms and formats, be it traditional media and new media, and in the ways that they shape the minds and the behaviors of people, especially in the current digital age.
I want to mention that program is available on the mission's Facebook page.
It is.
If you weren't able to catch it live, it was an excellent program. It covered many different past genocides and ethnic cleansing campaigns. And I think one of the things that was very unfortunate, but also interesting to see, was how all of these regimes use the same strategy of demonizing the victims, accusing them of the things that the regime was doing, and saying that the victims were actually the aggressors, and the ones causing a threat. I realize we're at the 1 hour mark, but an interesting question came in that was sort of related to what you discussed with respect to self-determination, with respect to hate speech and genocidal intent. And I think it kind of wraps a lot of the topics that we've been covering, which is to what extent, did you have any light to shed on this, that to what extent are we beyond, self-determination, and are we at the point of really looking at remedial succession for the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh?
So our understanding is, traditionally was that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh have exercised their right to self-determination a long time ago. And in fact, they did that they left the Soviet Union even, time-wise. If you look at the timeline, they did that even earlier than Azerbaijan did. So in line with these existing Soviet regulations at the time. So it's just the right to self-determination is an inalienable right that should be granted to all people without discrimination, without distinction on any basis. And to us, remedial secession is just another way of looking at it. And eventually that all comes down to the fundamental right of people to self-determination, something that is enshrined in the UN Charter and the fundamental documents adopted by the UN, and something that, as I said earlier, has driven the UN family to grow so many times in the past. But
you mean with respect to Kosovo, or?
With many precedents, well, Kosovo is still not a UN member state, but there are very many examples. History knows very many examples when nations, people chose to live a life a separate path. And of course, when there is violence and when there is inherent a record of massive, grave human rights violation, this makes it only an obvious choice. Because no matter what the leadership of Azerbaijan can say about their intentions to live peacefully with the Armenians side by side and to even to integrate them into Azerbaijan, we do understand that the only thing that, given the record of that country, given their human rights record, given their corruption record, given where they are in terms of democracy, rule of law, in terms of governance, we understand that the only thing they can deliver will be only more human rights violations for the Armenians, not least because for so many years they have cultivated this extremely toxic anti-Armenian environment. And it will be extremely difficult to unteach their people from that and to change the society. So for the time being, that doesn't seem possible. And the right for opting for the exercise of right of self-determination and the possibility that the right to choose their own political destiny would be the only reasonable and choice given the existential threat that the people of Artsakh are facing. So, and that's what that's one of the core issues that are central to the peaceful settlement of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because it's one of the three basic principles for the settlement, the right to self-determination. And the final settlement, of course, if lasting peace is to be achieved, then the question of the status of Artsakh becomes central.
I think that's a good note to end on, unless Osvanna, you have anything to add or to ask.
No, actually, there was one other issue that I wanted Sofia to elaborate on, which was the special session on the coronavirus disease that was held at the UN. That was an interesting exchange, and I think there's something posted on the mission's website about it as well. But I don't know if we have time to get into it. Sofia, if you want to tell us a little bit what happened with that, and I think that highlights the hypocrisy coming out of the Azerbaijani mission. Pretty well in terms of where we are today with the COVID and the pandemic and the aggression that was initiated by them during this pandemic. And then, they had the gall to go and have this kind of a special session, to host it so actually, can you please tell us a little bit about that, what that was and what Armenia's response to it was?
Well, it's not the first time when Azerbaijan is using a multilateral setting, a platform to promote a domestic agenda. And usually that all boils down to a very anti-Armenian agenda that they're pushing forward. And no matter what the original intention of or the packaging of the initiative can look like, with the whatever forums and conferences that they organize in their respective capital and their country, or under the auspices of the United Nations. And that's something we've been dealing with for many years. But of course, what makes it different this year is the level of cynicism and hypocrisy, because it's simply beyond reasonable understanding. It's simply incomprehensible that at a time when a global pandemic of an unprecedented level and scope is ravaging the world, when people are dying, one could actually use that as a pretext. One member of an international community can choose to use it as a pretext to start a war against its neighbor, and then to, at the same time, to come up with an initiative at the UN to discuss the humanitarian aspect of the pandemic. It's nothing short of hypocrisy, and that's something that Armenia has been very vocal about from the very start. Also, in light of, in the context of a strictly procedural nature of the process, simply because we didn't see any meaningful added value to that initiative, because ever since the pandemic broke out, it was all about the COVID-19 at the UN. All the UN, the COVID-19 pandemic was central to the UN initiatives, to the sessions of the United Nations, to the discussions, to the resolutions that were being adopted all this time. Everything we did. Also, the 75th session of the UN General Assembly was also structured around the topic of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's something, a reservation that we expressed. And of course, as we expected, when the session was conducted, and it was a virtual session because of the restrictions, the travel restrictions, the leader of Azerbaijan made a televised appearance, statement, which was completely dedicated to Armenia and not to COVID-19. And I believe he used the word Armenia maybe 20 times. Of course, that's something that our delegation had to point out, our permanent representative had to bring it to the attention to the member state, and to say that this is exactly what we had in mind when we expressed our reservation about these kinds of initiatives, because there can be nothing humanitarian about an initiative that comes from a country which uses a global pandemic as a pretext to kill people. and to bomb a factory that produces a personal protective equipment, for example, in the middle of pandemic.
The Secretary General of the UN had called for cessation of already pending hostilities during that time. And here they are, and they kind of renew, where there was already a ceasefire in effect, and they go and initiate a new aggression at the time of the pandemic instead of kind of yielding back. And
the question one more time.
Make a ceasefire of a pending kind of an aggression already, as was called for by the Secretary General of the UN during the pandemic.
Yes, yes. Well, the UN Secretary General reacted to the pandemic from the very start, and he said that the global community needs to focus on the common enemy, and he called for silencing the guns, for stopping all the violence, and for all member states to commit to global ceasefire in all corners of the world. And that was a call that was supported by 170 member states, including Armenia, but Azerbaijan was nowhere on that list. They did, however, announce post factum that they intended to join that list, but the fact is they're not on the list. They're not on the list of 170 countries which supported the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, something very important. And of course, we've been very clear about this. We've been saying this all along, that this was clearly one of the many detectable, clearly identifiable early warning signs that this country is up to something. They're up to a violent, something very violent. And ever since, you asked that question earlier about what is it that the mission has been doing since the violence broke up. Well, we've been presenting abundant evidence, first of all, about documenting the fact that this was a premeditated, pre-planned aggression. Also enabled and facilitated by Turkey, as reflected in the reports on the use and recruitment of mercenaries and foreign terrorist fighters from the Turkish-controlled areas in Syria. But also there were all abundant evidence about other warning signs that were there. And that's something that we've been reporting, also presenting the reports of the human rights defenders of Armenia and Artsakh about the inhumane treatment and atrocities that were committed in course of this aggression, and also the destruction of cultural heritage, religious sites, and other civilian objects.
So I'll mention along those lines, I guess, two things that you just touched on that people might not be familiar with. So the UN Working Group on Mercenaries issued, I guess, a summary of its conclusions about Turkey recruiting mercenaries and introducing them into, I think, what it called the conflict zone. So again, this is publicly available. If you want to Google even UN Working Group mercenaries in Turkey, Azerbaijan, or Nagorno-Karabakh, that's something that'll come up. And then with respect to cultural heritage, again, this is sort of UN organs or speaking between the lines, but UNESCO issued a press release recently explaining that after the decision of its second protocol committee to send a technical mission of experts to Nagorno-Karabakh to assess certain significant cultural heritage sites there and their status, they've been reaching out to Azerbaijan, and I believe the press release says that Azerbaijan has not been cooperating. So these are two publicly available statements, the first by UN Working Group on Mercenaries and the second by UNESCO, that everyone can look up and easily find. I think a lot of the questions that we're seeing are, I guess, people's frustration because it's hard to sort of counter. All of us are on social media, and we've been seeing so many, not just from major media institutions, but from everyday users or even bots. I can't even tell you the amount of messages I've received direct messages of, mutilated bodies of tortured soldiers. And it's been very difficult for people to be receiving sort of that onslaught of media and then seeing that there's, no response or very little direct response from major institutions. And I think, Sofia, that goes to your point that you sort of just have to read between the lines of what the UN actually is saying. But one of the concerns that people are now expressing is that this threat goes beyond Nagorno-Karabakh and it extends to Armenia. We all read the reports about the military parade in Baku and certain statements about Yerevan being Azerbaijan's, I think it was historical lands or something to that effect. Could you, and one of the questions asked, could you please sort of speak to whether or not this threat is extending to Armenia and what Armenia is doing to kind of sound the alarm bells?
Well, I have to say that those confabulations are not new, and they've been voiced before many times, especially with the current leaders of both Turkey and Azerbaijan. I think their rhetoric has always been, there's always been a certain degree of insanity about what they're saying. And that's, of course, something that we have been consistently pointing out to and bringing up at the UN. And rhetoric, the countries need to be responsible for the rhetoric of their leaders, even if it's just rhetoric, because we definitely see this as a very disturbing threat, well, sort of a sign of a demonstration of a potential intention, whether or not the will happen in the future or not. Of course, the international law is very clear about consequences in such cases, but even the rhetoric is inadmissible. It shouldn't be taken place at all. And we shouldn't be dealing with such a rhetoric. But the truth is that these are the kinds of leaders, and probably they do that for domestic, their respective audiences at home. So we've been duly communicated our concerns, and we've done it throughout the aggression as well. It's not just the parade, but also all throughout the aggression. That there were extensive studies of how the discourse in both Turkey and Azerbaijan reflected the growing anti-Armenian sentiments that were primarily sponsored by at the highest political level. And unfortunately, the outcomes of those studies were very disturbing, and we have produced a very detailed analysis of those manifestations of hate speech and anti-Armenian ethnic hatred that was present in public discourse in both Turkey and Azerbaijan. And there are many examples. Most common form is the dehumanization, animalization, calling Armenians dogs, rats, beasts. And we all know from history that animalization is the ultimate form of dehumanization to deny victims their humanity. So this is a clear genocidal demonstration of a genocidal intent. And that's something that, of course, we communicate. We need to do that, and we will continue to do that. And those member states, they need to realize that this is not the right way to go, even if it's just rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, it is just rhetoric, but this is an absolutely unacceptable rhetoric for the civilized world. Be calling a nation a remnant of a sword, for instance. This is not acceptable for no one. But I believe that's just something that is not even in the interest of neither Turkey nor Azerbaijan. If you think deeply about that, such an overt demonstration, that is not a very clever thing to do. Nevertheless, it's happening, and we are, whenever it's happening, we report.
Sofia, speaking of hate speech, can you tell us a little bit about the CERT convention, which both Armenia and Azerbaijan are party to? And if I'm not mistaken, there's a review coming up for Azerbaijan as a state party to the CERT convention. I think it was set for originally in November, but it was postponed and we don't have a date yet. And I know the Armenian Bar Association's UN task force has submitted a report in connection with that review, which highlights some of the speech that you just mentioned. And I think that's also posted on our Facebook for the viewers who'd like to see. It's a pretty elaborate report, and I think we might even have a separate program dealing with that issue, with that topic separately, which will be announced once that's finalized. But can you tell us a little bit about the CERT convention and what consequences, if any, would Azerbaijan face in this upcoming review?
So, well, Sana, as a party to the convention, Azerbaijan is, of course, under the obligation to comply with the requirements of the convention. And since I believe the process is, again, it's Geneva-based, and I'm not entirely involved in that, but I know that this is something that our government prioritizes, and it will be there will be a very careful process when we get closer to it. But that being said, the hate speech is not just a Geneva conversation. A lot is happening also in New York, with the Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently announcing hate speech as countering hate speech as an important priority for the UN system. And in 2019, the UN launched the hate speech strategy that aims to eliminate hate speech at both national and international levels. And one of the primary and principal actors in implementing the hate speech is the office with which Armenia shares a very special, has a very special relationship, and that's the Office of the UN Secretary General Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention. Because clearly hate speech is one of the most easily detectable early warning signs as a precursor to possible atrocities. And that's something that is part of the United Nations and the Secretary General's global prevention agenda. And Armenia is a strong partner here. It's a natural partner, and we will continue to work with our partner, with the UN and with the member states who drive this agenda forward. And that's, by the way, our recent event was on mass media and genocide prevention. It had carried a significant focus on countering hate speech, and that was also part of the addresses made by the two undersecretary generals during the event, because we know it too well.
Right. All right. I think we're coming to the end of the program. Yelena, is there anything that you wanted to kind of ask while I look at the questions to see if we've kind of missed it? I apologize if we didn't get to your specific question. We tried to kind of group them together because there were a lot of very similar questions. Let me just scroll through here. I think generally we've touched on the topics that were raised, general topics that were raised through the questions.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through them again one last time, so I had my camera off. So if people are interested in working with the Armenian Bar Association's UN Task Force, please feel free to reach out to the ABA. There's various ways that you can work with us and assist us. Osvanna mentioned the CERD report, but there are other reports that NGOs like the Armenian Bar Association can submit. And I think the email address is, I just lost it, is it armenbar.org, Osvanna?
I think it's Armenian Bar.
Armenianbar.org. And on a personal note, Sofia, I have to say, so this is something that, you know, is your work you live with every day. But I wanted to thank you. It's been such a pleasure to get to collaborate with you, and not just through this program, but it's really been a pleasure to learn about the remarkable work that you do.
Thank you. That's very mutual.
I can imagine it's not easy.
No, but it's very for us. It is as you said, it happens every day, and it's never easy, even if it happens every day, because every day there is something new at the UN, and you just mentioned that you're learning new things, and that's what happens. You learn, and that's probably one of the beauties of the United Nations, with all its limitations and problems and weaknesses, but still it's a place where you learn and you share. And likewise, for me and for the mission, it's a great pleasure, and having this partnership with the ABA UN Task Force, and having your advice, hearing from you, learning from you. No, we learn. That's how we all learn best, and learning from each other.
Thank you for that, Sofia, and it's been a great pleasure for us. I know as attorneys, we're very adversarial, we're aggressive, and would like to, you know, which kind of is not always very diplomatic, shall we say. So we've learned a lot from you as well in our collaborations, and I know that diplomacy takes, you know, there's a certain skill that's required for diplomacy, and it's not necessarily the same skill that an aggressive attorney may acquire, but yeah, there's an appreciation for both. We need to, and I'm glad that we're having this opportunity to collaborate together. And thank you for being receptive to our suggestions, and for making yourself available to us to answer our questions, and to allow us to help you in whatever way we can. So thank you for that collaboration. Hopefully we'll continue with that. And as Yelena said, if anybody wants to help with the efforts, please do reach out. And thank you so much for devoting this time to this program, and for enlightening us and our viewers on how the UN works, and what realistically can and cannot be accomplished at the UN.
Thank you. Thank you, Osvanna, and thank you everyone who, for sending in those very thoughtful questions. It was a lot for me also to reflect on, and I will probably do so after the program. And it's always good to, you know, have a possible opportunity to reflect on even on the things that are part of your everyday job, but still there's always something new. So thank you very much, everyone. Osvanna, Yelena, thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.